places 25. I think it's we're all so busy. So I think that we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order so we can honor everyone's time. And I know Angela's looking at those bylaws, but I think we have 7 here, and I'm not sure exactly how many are on the committee. So we'll just go ahead and roll like we have a quorum. But welcome everyone. I'm Lamar County Commissioner Jody Shagwick-Nally, and a couple of weeks ago we met for the first time as the legislative subcommittee of the Colorado Forest Health Council. I'm very grateful for your vote of confidence to be voted as chair for this subcommittee, and for the immediate future, we'll try to meet every 2 weeks. We know there's a lot to kind of cover and get up to speed on, but we may not always be meeting every 2 weeks, so we thought we'd just get it on everyone's calendar to see if we can hold those spots, and then maybe as we go forward and figure out exactly how much we need to meet, we'll adjust as we go forward. So first, let's just go around and just do a quick roll call, but just kind of keep just say hi and your name and where you're from real quick, so we can honor everyone's time. Again, Laramie County Commissioner Jody Shagwick-Nally, Northern Colorado, and I'm trying to look at everyone's. Let's go to Ben, Commissioner.
Good morning, Ben Tisdall, Ouray County Commissioner, and I was on the Forest Health Council that was formed, the advisory committee council in 2017, along with Mike Morgan here. It's great to see him.
Mark Morgan and Morgan Timber Products and Colorado Timber Industry Association.
I'm Pat Dorsey with the National Wild Turkey Federation. I live in Bayfield, Colorado, La Plata County.
Good morning, Julie Stencil. I'm an in-house real estate attorney with Xcel Energy in the utility spot.
And I think that's it today, correct?
Yeah, that is. And I did look, so we have 12 people signed up for the committee. So we're not at quorum today. So I
guess we can't approve the minutes then probably, so we'll just pass it on to the next one.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's move on to our next agenda item. We'll just go ahead and welcome everyone. Thanks for being here today. Let's go ahead and move on to our next agenda item. I think we were going to have a quick legislative overview of the legislative session now that it has come to a screeching halt as it was barreling to a close. Actually, we had 2 bill signings on Tuesday, 2 bills that came out of Laramie County on Tuesday by the governor. So I know it's that 30-day window, then things are going pretty fast and furious. So Angela, do you want to take over on that portion of the agenda?
I do, yes. So I have some slides here, and I will share these so folks don't have to take furious notes. So let me just get that set up. Okay, can people see my slides okay here?
Yeah, it looks great.
Oh, good. Thanks. All right, I'll go back into presenting mode. Okay, so I'll try and run through this pretty quickly here, but please stop me and ask questions as we go, because there are a lot of bills that passed or did not pass this session. And if you have questions, I can do my best to answer them. I know a lot about some of the bills, having worked on them, and then others I do not know as much. So I can suggest who we might need to talk to find out information about, why they passed, why they didn't pass, other issues. So first, I'll summarize wildfire and watershed related legislation broadly, and then get into more of the forest management specific legislation. I'm also going to highlight a couple sort of key federal funding opportunities that became available just in the last, sort of 6 months. So on wildfires, issues that I thought this group might be particularly interested in. And these slides may not be comprehensive. So if there are other bills that you know of and you're curious about, please let me know and we'll make a note and get the information. So to start off with, some of you may have heard or seen in the news that the Colorado Fire Commission had put forth recommendations to establish a wildland urban interface code board, which would theoretically set sort of some kind of minimum code for the wildland urban interface in the state. And there was a hope to get that in this ledge session onto a bill and moved through. Unfortunately, it did not. My understanding is that it sort of ran out of time. And Ben, feel free to chime in here if you have more context. And I think there was also some question of how supportive local governments and counties were of the current language. But my understanding again is that there's a hope to bring that about in the legislature next year. So Ben, is there anything you want to add on that?
No, well, about the WUI code board.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, well, I could talk all day about that, but it's difficult to. And I could.
You don't have to.
The governor requested the Fire Commission to work on this back in July last year, and so we did. And we studied some elements of the effort from 2013. We had 24 people on this WUI subcommittee of the Fire Commission to look at this, and we met a lot, and finally came up with, well, the WUI is ever evolving, and so we could set some rules, but a kind of map frozen in time of what the WUI was difficult to determine. So we set up, our recommendation was to set up a code board that would create kind of a moving definition of what the WUI is. It's kind of flexible. We never thought that the parts of Boulder County that burnt on December 30th were really part of the WUI. Ringfield was never really that interested in wildfire matters. So we made some recommendations to set up a code board that would determine rules about what type of new construction and elements of new construction would be considered. It's really difficult to capture existing construction. In the end, we finalized the recommendations on April 12th, which was just a month before the end of session, and we thought that was going to be enough time. We thought there were legislators very willing and anxious to pick this up and move with it, and the process wasn't as transparent at that point as I think I would have found useful. In the end, it was proposed to be an amendment to an existing bill, and the bill sponsor didn't want the amendment on the bill, and then we tried to get it on as an amendment on another bill, which the Senate rejected that idea. And anyway, at the end of session, people were more focused on other things, it turns out. So there may be more efforts. We're going to regroup and determine how to move forward. But
Great. Thank you, Ben, for that context. Anybody have any questions on this? Because I know it's a sort of a hot button issue.
I just want to add on to what Ben had to say. Thanks, Commissioner, that, I was on that kind of effort too at the end, trying to find, a way to kind of insert it at the end. And we were kind of surprised, kind of some of the term events at the very end of the session there. So I know that there's a lot of disappointment, and we're hoping, like Ben said, to regroup here soon. I know there's conversations already happening, this is like my fourth meeting this week as different groups says we're doing a legislative review and talking about, pros and cons and wins and going forward. So I appreciate Commissioner Tisdale's really hard and dedicated work in this space.
Thanks, Jody. And it probably, our thought was it was going to be its own standalone. So that's probably what we'll focus next efforts on. But it'll be, the Fire Commission hasn't regrouped following that whole effort. So let's see.
Great. Thank you. All All right, and also on the wildfire front, there was a bill to secure additional state funding for wildfire investigations. So to investigate the cause of wildfires, there's a large proportion of wildfires in Colorado whose cause goes unknown, and that bill failed. I don't have much more on the context for why, so I won't speculate, but just FYI. A couple bills that passed that are sort of fire suppression or recovery specific, SB 22-114, fire suppression ponds, water rights. This really clarifies sort of the status of ponds that can be used for fire suppression. It allows a board of county commissioners to apply to the state engineer to designate a pond as a fire suppression pond, which allows them to just have more organized conversations about water rights and maintaining ponds that otherwise sort of might be illegal. And then SB 22-206, disaster preparedness and recovery resources. This was a big bill that was largely in response to the Marshall Fire and provides state funding to supplement federal resources and other resources that may support communities post-disaster. So not just fires, but any disaster. And this, I think a lot of this came about because folks affected by the Marshall Fire realized that many of them were not insured sufficiently to rebuild, for instance, or new requirements for energy efficiency in building were going to make rebuilding even more cost prohibitive, and so the state wanted to step in and close some of that gap. It also creates a new sort of climate preparedness and disaster preparedness position within the governor's office to really oversee, state response to disasters like this and prepare the state, for the future. And I think that's really in response to Colorado becoming what, some of my colleagues at the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management call a disaster state, where we unfortunately have, one or two somewhat major natural disasters each year. So that is coming about, and the, I think, position to lead that effort has already been posted, so it's moving pretty quickly. Any questions about any of those before I move on to watersheds?
Angela, I'm wondering real quick, I know the state just kind of took one of our top resiliency recovery managers in our Office of Emergency Management. Is that Office of State Resiliency connected to these efforts? Is that inside that office, or how is that connected?
So can you say again where this person went, where your staff person went?
I think she's in the State Office of Resiliency is what I think.
The CRO, Colorado Resilience Office. Yeah, so great question. So this new office will be part of the governor's office, and really I think it's meant to be that sort of overarching coordinating role. And a bit of background, I've heard that I think, especially during the Marshall Fire, the governor's office felt very strapped in terms of having staff available to provide that sort of leadership role. So this is, I think, in part in response to that. So it would be sort of an overarching coordinating office, from the governor's perspective. But then, as you said, so the Colorado Resiliency Office exists within the Department of Local Affairs at the state, within DOLA. And it's been there for a while, and its job is to serve local governments in terms of, preparing for resilience, broadly speaking, not just to natural disasters, but economic resilience, et cetera, housing resilience. And then there is also, of course, our Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management within the Department of Public Safety, and DHSEM, as its acronym is. They're the folks who liaise with FEMA following a disaster, and set up, the state recovery task forces and that kind of thing. So I think how it's going to work is that this new office, again, is that sort of control center from the governor's perspective when it comes to those highest level priorities, and then, is working through some of those other existing agencies to implement. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. I didn't get to talk to her before she left, so, but she will be certainly missed. She's phenomenal, so she'll be doing great work. But yeah, we're kind of sad, but we're happy for the state.
Good. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, but hopefully she'll do a great job helping local governments across the state. All right. So on the watershed side of things, HB 22-1379 was a sort of broad brush water focused bill that uses federal American Rescue Plan ARPA funding. So these are sort of post-COVID federal funds that come to the state and can be used for a few things. Water is sort of one focus. And so as part of 1379, it dedicated $10 million to the Colorado Water Conservation Board for some of their watershed restoration programs that can, for instance, be used to fund post-fire watershed restoration. And then also to support this new effort around wildfire-ready watersheds that Chris Sturm at CWCB is leading. And the wildfire-ready watersheds concept is really to map across the state all those areas that are particularly vulnerable to post-fire erosion and flooding, and identify them ideally before a fire happens, in order to develop control measures ahead of time. And so this is what Water Conservation Board's working on. They'll, of course, be making sure this tool is accessible to local governments. So some of those funds support that and can be used for existing post-fire watershed restoration needs, like we still have with the Cameron Peak Fire, for instance, and East Troublesome. And then an additional $5 million in that bill is going to go to support and empower local governments and other local entities to help them have the capacity to potentially apply for federal infrastructure bill funding. So the idea here is really that there's a need to support local capacity to apply for and administer potential federal funds that are coming down when it comes to water projects specifically. So that's that. And then in the long bill, DNR / the Water Conservation Board also secured 9 new staff members to provide regional support for the Water Plan Grant Program, which is really a fairly broad program that supports water projects across the state. So the effort, again, there is to support local governments and being successful, I think, in applying for those. Any questions on that water side? Alrighty, so moving on here, more on to sort of forest-focused bills. Unfortunately, HB 22-1166 failed. This bill was entitled Incentives to Promote the Colorado Timber Industry. It contained a provision to create a new internship program that would basically provide sort of cost share for forestry companies, for timber management, or for logging companies and wood products companies as well, to bring on interns and really train them up, recognizing that there's a workforce challenge in that industry. I was not closely plugged into this bill, so I'm not exactly sure why it failed. And if anybody else on the call has any perspective, feel free to chime in. I'm happy to try and get that information too. Oh, go ahead.
I would appreciate any information you develop on that.
Yeah, sure thing.
Workforce.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm trying to look back at my notes because I remember, we have 2 state commissioner associations. We meet weekly during a session and vote on support or not supporting bills. And I'm drawing a blank why this one wasn't. So I will ask around about that and maybe have that for the next meeting. I'm sure it's a combination of things, but and it might have been. I'll have to look back where it paused in the process. Maybe it went into appropriations or something. I'm not sure. So I'll ask around about that too.
Thank
Molly,
you.
or would you like me to reach out to Molly Pitts, Angela, or are you planning to do that?
Pat, if you would like to take that on, I'd really appreciate that and get her perspective on why it didn't move through, and any sort of suggestions folks had for maybe modifying it in the future.
Okay.
I've been working with Molly quite a bit on this workforce development and some other people, and it's not just critical in the industry side of things. It's critical in all the groups. You're looking at a huge waterfall of money coming down in a variety of projects through sources, federal and state, and none of the agencies that I have contact with, and I also work on the advisory group for the Front Range Community College. here in Fort Collins, which is kind of unique because they have one of the very few SAF accredited associate's degrees in forestry here, and they have a good 30-year program. And they're getting funding shortages, but in all the other agencies that are on that advisory group, everybody has extreme shortages. I spent some time with a regional forester. Frank said that 30% of their positions that they advertised never even got an applicant, and 60% of them, after they accepted it, they did not accept, the individual did not accept the position. And the feds are trying to fill 500 positions in this region alone. And I talked with the cities and the counties, and virtually all of them have extreme shortages. So one of the interests that I have here today is this educational side of this thing. We've got all these plans for all these new groups and programs, and you don't have anybody to do the work. And I think it's that really has my interest, I guess, and any suggestions would be useful. But it was interesting to me. I was just back from the Colorado Timber Industry Association annual meeting, and in an effort to hire new foresters, the state of Colorado, I talked about the other good associates program in the United States, which is Stevens Point, Wisconsin. And interestingly enough, there were 3 people in the room, recently hired foresters for state and fed, that were all Stevens Point's products. And here we have a program here in Colorado that we need to grow, and we are getting our hires from Wisconsin. So I think this approach, I'm working with Molly and also with the industry side of things, but it's an acute shortage. And we've got also another important part about that comes through the commissioners in the various counties and school boards is that successful programs, Oregon has a great model for one, generally involve a high school program with a path to community college, and then 4-year if necessary. So there you've got my 2 cents. You know my agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. I think that's really a great perspective, and I think we should maybe, all investigate a little bit and come back, and maybe it will need some advocacy. So I would love to sit down and talk with you. And
I appreciate that very much, Jody.
Hey, Jody, I'm going to jump to this fire briefing here. If it depending on how long it is, so I may be back.
No problem, Ben. And I'm sorry to hear
See you
about
guys.
your challenges. Take care. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Well, this is a great discussion, and yeah, it sounds like workforce may be an important conversation moving forward within the committee. All right, so moving along here, as Mark, you said it very well. There's a lot of money that's coming through both from the state and feds to do forestry work and to do wildfire mitigation work. So you're right on point with that. And here are a few of the bills or program funds that sort of illustrate that. So you may know the existing Forest Restoration and Wildfire Risk Mitigation Program. Its acronym is known as FIRWORM in the State Forest Service. That is a statewide grant program that lots of different folks can apply to fund projects. That program got a couple injections of cash through a couple different bills this session. They already have an annual $8 million appropriation. So, barring some big legislative change, they're guaranteed $8 million each year into that program. But this year, because of some of those top ups, they are going to have over $15 million available for that grant program. It will likely open in the fall of this year, so fall 2022. So lots of funds available through that. And then HB 22-1011 passed. This creates a new grant program at the State Forest Service with $10 million. initially to match local funding for wildfire mitigation work or local program investments. So, the example would be that if, I'll use Summit County as an example, if they raise $2 million a year through property taxes for wildfire mitigation work, this fund could theoretically match that. There's also language in that bill that broadens it a little bit, understanding that in some counties it's very difficult to pass those types of measures. So, it has language about if a local government is making investments in wildfire mitigation programs or has stood up some kind of program, this fund could potentially match it. So, I think this has some really interesting potential to incentivize local investments, and we'll have to see how it is actually implemented. And so that program will be established over the next year. I'll just run through these last two, and then we'll pause for questions. HB 22-1007. This creates another new grant program in the State Forest Service that specifically would provide funds for local outreach and education. So this, would fund, for instance, like door-to-door wildfire mitigation education at the local level, or some kind of county-run, wildfire awareness campaign or something like that. And then it also contains some changes to the existing, what's currently, I believe, a tax deduction for homeowner fuels reduction around homes, and it turns it into a tax credit. And I believe homeowners can get up to a $625 tax credit to offset the cost of doing fuels reduction around their home if they're spending up to $2,500 on that work. And then SB 21007, this requires the State Forest Service and the Division of Fire Prevention and Control to really improve state level wildfire risk awareness campaigns. So, May is Wildfire Awareness Month, as some of you may be aware. And really this bill provides some funding and calls on these two agencies to really beef that up, understand what's sort of needed and make it much more effective, and also do some more coordinated sort of state level education campaigns. Any questions about those bills?
Only about the education portion there in 1007. That is education. Are those programs for like public education for you're trying to reach civil groups? Are those educational efforts at the high school or college level? What's the focus there?
Great question. My understanding is that it was directed towards public education, public outreach sort of campaigns, that type of thing. But that's a great question, and let's dig into that bill. I'll put that on my shoulders to see if it could be interpreted that way at all. And all of these things, because they're new programs, I do think there's opportunity to work with the State Forest Service as they're being developed.
Thank you.
Okay, and then getting into onto sort of the federal side of things. Some of you may be aware that the State Forest Service can work on federal lands and on adjacent lands under something called Good Neighbor Authority. And so again, through a couple of the bills that moved through this session, they received $5 million into their what's called the Healthy Forest Vibrant Communities Fund. It's a fund at the State Forest Service that supports a variety of their programs. But one of the things it does is it can support these Good Neighbor Authority projects. So it's all to say that these are dollars available to fund forestry projects that are actually led by the State Forest Service. So as opposed to granting dollars out to folks around the state, this is the State Forest Service planning work, implementing work either on federal lands or on adjacent lands. So just to make you aware of that. And that I think sort of ties in because just last month, there was a big announcement from the feds about the bipartisan infrastructure law. So at the federal level, you may have heard about the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That act, once it went into law, is now called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So that's why you sort of hear both bandied about, but But as part of that, the U.S. Forest Service has developed this 10-year wildfire crisis strategy, which is really to target dollars at the fire sheds, as they call them, that they see as highest risk around the United States. And in Colorado, their analyses point to the Colorado Front Range. You can see that map there on the right as the fire sheds that are sort of highest priority from a life and property perspective primarily. And so they are going to invest just over $18 million in the Arapahoe Roosevelt and Pike San Isabel National Forests this fiscal year. And then they're targeting just over $170 million of investment up to 2024 in those areas too. So pretty big dollars compared to what they've seen. And, to Mark's point, I think they're, obviously everybody's excited about this funding, but the real question is, how is implementation going to happen? How are they going to hire enough folks? And they're really working through all of that right now. And then also just to highlight, there's another federal program called the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, CFLRP, and 2 landscapes in Southern Colorado successfully received funds through that program earlier this spring as well. So there's about $6 million coming to a couple of those landscapes. And Pat, I believe one of those landscapes is Southwest Colorado, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. So any questions about these?
The Good Neighbor Authority program in the past, that was originally developed here in Colorado. It was actually the beginning of it, I think, about 20 years ago. And then it kind of faded out and it's coming back again. But that, from the industry side, that has been an extremely effective program. One of the things that I'm looking at here today, all these activities and funds and programs, we're looking for managed acres on the ground. How do we actually impact things on the ground and get work done? And that's my focus here is on any of these legislative efforts are education and getting the work done on the ground, which I believe are hand in hand. But the Good Neighbor Authority, I think if you look at actual activity that gets done and successful work on the ground, that has an extremely high percentage of being effective. I think you actually get it's a great program. So I'm happy to see that get the 5 million. And I see that, I guess my question would be, is that going to be an ongoing thing? Is that 5 million annually, or is that 5 million one time, or what's the situation?
Yeah, great question. It is one time for this investment. So yeah, good to know, I suppose, for future ledge sessions.
It's just that what often happens is on these one-time things, there's always a panic to get the work done and be effective with it. And generally, you're much more effective and get better bang for your buck if you have more lead time and throughout the timber industry, consistency of program is a huge thing. Mm-hmm. And that reliability, and it allows you to get more work for your money that you're spending these tax dollars on. So I was just curious about, so all of these, the 10 million and the 5 million, those were all one-time things. And
I'm pretty sure, but I will check.
Thank you, Angela.
Okay, so moving on again to another program at the state. So this is the Colorado Strategic Wildfire Action Program, COSWAP. It was created last year through state stimulus funds, SB 21-258. And I'm raising it here because this ledge session, it received an additional $4 million of one-time funds through a couple bills, HB 22-1379 and 1012. COSWAP was really envisioned initially as a one-time stimulus program to just get more money out on the ground to do mitigation work, and also, do some of the workforce development that we have been talking about, particularly with the Department of Corrections. So COSWAP has 2 programs within it. One is on workforce development. It funds fuels reduction projects through hand crew work by the Department of Corrections and conservation corps around the state. And then it also funds, it can fund workforce development training. So actually, Mark, to your questions, I think there's some potential here to have this program support some of the workforce development we've been talking about. And then it also has this landscape resilience investment, which this year was just focused on a few focused areas, those counties in red you see, and then the 3 RMRI areas. And that was done because the initial bill last year basically requires funds to be focused in areas where you have the greatest potential to protect life, property, and infrastructure. And so using existing data sets, those are the areas that kind of popped out as the places to start. And I think moving forward with this additional $4 million, we're having conversations now about what the future of this program looks like and wanting to ensure that it's not duplicative with the other new programs that were established this session, which we just talked about, which in some cases do very similar things. So we're having those conversations now. Any questions about this?
No, I think this is one of those bills that Ben and I and some others really, is that the $7 million part of this that we fought kind of at the end of the session to get some more money added to at the last minute to try to, I think we were doing a flurry of messaging, trying to get us to talk and try to get some more money. And you're right, it's one time, but I'm glad we're having those conversations because, there's a lot of work to do and one-time money isn't gonna get done. But yeah, thanks. This is really great. And I appreciate the maps, Angela. It's really helpful along with the things. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I know it's, I feel like otherwise there's no way to keep track of all of these programs. Okay, so last slide here. HB 22-1323, this provided $5 million for nursery upgrades and expansion at the Colorado State Forest Service seedling nursery, which, I think the State Forest Service would argue is very much needed. It's a pretty old facility and needs a lot of upgrades. So ideally, this will allow them to upgrade and expand. They had requested $10 million to do a full sort of renovation and upgrade. And so I think we're having conversations now about whether we try and seek that additional $5 million next year. And, of course, tree seedlings are used by lots of folks for restoration efforts, including post-fire restoration and riparian restoration. And then the last bill I'll highlight here, HB 22-1012. This bill, it really started out as it was originally going to be sort of a grant program with a forest carbon aspect to it. And it morphed a little bit, really the State Forest Service said, well, we don't have somebody who focuses on forest carbon. And so what it became was a bill to require the State Forest Service to develop a forest carbon accounting framework and hire a position to do that. So they'll have a dedicated forest carbon position. And then, Jody, as you said, 1012 also became this vehicle for adding on some additional investments into programs we've already talked about. So that some of the furworm increases that I highlighted and the increases to GNA funding and that kind of thing that I highlighted that bill was amended to add those, and it successfully moved through. So any questions about these two pieces?
The nursery, they definitely need that up there, and their state nursery has done great work for a lot of years. I think one thing that's most all of our fire species here in Colorado, primarily most all of our forest species, have evolved in a fire atmosphere, and so essentially you get really good natural regeneration on most of your fires. So your nurseries provide a lot of seedling stock for other uses. And when you go back with your nursery stock, what that generally does, if you're going to go in with any of our standard species here in Colorado, our ponderosa pine, Doug fir, lower lodgepole pine higher up, and then spruce fir at high elevation, most all of those naturally restock. What you get out of your nursery is a 2 or 3, sometimes a 4-year head start by planting a seedling rather than waiting for natural regeneration. Most of the time, And you still need those. And I think what I'm getting at here is, I think that's a great investment, because what you get is, we're burning on a huge scale right now. So when you burn several 100,000 acres at once, then you're gonna get 95 or 97% natural regeneration. But then that 3 to 5%, you're gonna want to do something with, and that's where your nursery stock is going to come in. But I think looking at it, I don't think you want to look at it as a source for stocking. It would be financially impossible to stock at the level that you're going to need for these large fires. You're going to get natural restocking, and generally we end up having to thin it because we get too much. But I think they needed the upgrade over there. It's been a long time, but I would hate for people to think that we're going to burn the place down and then plant it, because 90% of the time, or 95, you don't need to plant it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Any other questions about these?
No, I appreciate Mr. Morgan's insights and comments. That's really helpful. Thank you.
All right, well, that's it. So, I'm happy to share these slides so you all have them for reference. Yeah, and I'll pass it back over to you, Jody.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you, Angela. I know you put a lot of work into that, and I appreciate the slides, and we can send them out to the committee. That would be great for those who couldn't come. And then, yeah, and I think maybe we circle back with some of that information about why the workforce, maybe we need to, because the work starts now, right? The legislation ends, but this session ends, but now it's time to gear up for the next one. And I know the two bills we successfully got done, we started, probably had it already rolling by August. So it's something, if we need to really put some energy behind that and then get some partners to kind of help us early on advocate for some of those things. So I think that'd be a great discussion for this committee to make recommendations to the council as a whole. So something to think about going forward, because I do think you're right. The workforce piece is, there's a lot of work to do, and we don't have enough bodies to do it. So, but I think it's a great overview. I'm hoping our colleagues who couldn't come today, I know a lot going on, May's really busy in general anyway. So with that, anyone else have anything else to say? We wanted to kind of keep these meetings concise and short, and kind of, cover a few things and then keep rolling. So in little digestible pieces, we wanted to kind of focus on the legislative review. So
I'm sorry I missed the last meeting. I had some matters that I had to deal with, but I did watch the video of it. And so I would like to think, and I appreciate the video very much. So that was very helpful to catch up on. And other than that, thank you.
yeah, Pat.
And Jody, I have a quick one, and this may be a question for Angela, but I think the carbon position is an interesting one, and it's good. Are we looking at a similar position for impacts to watersheds in terms of water yield? It seems like a lot of this forest work, depending on what you read, can either generate more yield or take yield out of the system. And it seems like that may be something we want to focus on in the future.
Great suggestion. Thanks, Pat. No, I don't think anybody's explicitly looking at that right now in terms of a dedicated position. I do know that it's a bit of a conversation that's been happening as part of the water plan update. So the state has a state water plan, and they're in the process of updating it now. The last version, I believe, came out in 2015. So it's been a while, and there's a whole section on thriving watersheds in this current water plan. So I think when the draft plan comes out, I'm happy to circulate that, and it might be something to focus on if this council wants to provide feedback on those sections and the priorities they identify.
From the industry side of things, we very much understand that in this thing, water is the dog and forestry is the tail. And here in Colorado, we pretty well practice forestry to manage water, and we're aware of that, and the watersheds being the critical thing. And I think the other thing that comes out of that is, I was watching the different I was kind of totaling in my mind the bills and the funding that it came out here from the Fed and the states side. I did some work on this a couple, 3 years ago, and I kind of felt like we were going to need to make a direct investment of around $100 million a year to get our watersheds back to health. And that's on a 50-year rotation, treating 2% per year. And it was the water side of this thing. They are going to be the driving force, but they also could be the driving funding mechanism. This is the kind of partners that we need to get the work done on the landscape scale that we need to achieve. So I think the water side of this and the bills, I guess from the industry side, we're going to be watching legislative efforts from the water side of this real closely. And I don't think that's a negative. I think that's a huge opportunity actually from the board.
Thank you, Mark. I think that's a great point. And I do believe that there's a lot of overlap between the fire sheds and the watersheds and all the work that's happening. We're all working in the same landscape, and anything we can do to leverage those resources we all have kind of a similar space or place we want to be. And I think that's a great point that if we understand where other work is being done, maybe we can leverage, on top of that and pull resources and partner with some of these agencies, because I think it's they're all kind of going towards a similar area. And I agree with you. It's a huge effort in a lot of ways. I've been watching the water situation with the Colorado River Basin and all that. We've been having a lot of conversations, and it's just we're kind of in an interesting point in time. So I'm really grateful for the snow this weekend, and then all of my events I had supposed to speak on climate change up in Estes this weekend, and it got canceled. One of the people on the panel is Mike Nelson, the meteorologist, and he said, "Yeah, I think you guys want to consider redoing this." So we canceled because of his recommendation. So it's nice to have him on that panel. But I think
We were doing some mitigation work for DU, bought out the Girl Scouts up in
yep.
there. So we were doing some mitigation work for DU this week, and we shut that down this morning because got a pretty wet, sloppy show up there this morning. But
Yeah.
Let's see if the weather guys come through with their 15 to 30 inches, or whether it's going to be big fury and full of sun and fury signifying nothing. But
Well, I guess all my planting and washing my cars helped get some moisture coming. I guess it's always what they say, right? So just keep washing my car a lot so we can get some moisture. But
I'm taking credit. Actually, I put my shovel away last weekend, and I said to my husband, "Is this a good idea?" He's like, "Of course."
Yeah.
I want credit for all this moisture because I fixed my wife's irrigation system for her garden the last 2 days. So I think I deserve credit for this late season storm.
I want you all to come to Durango and wash your cars is what I'm thinking.
Yeah. We'll come there and wash our cars and do all this. Well, good job, everyone, with your different snow and rain dances. Anything else? Otherwise, we'll wrap it up and give everyone back some time. But I appreciate y'all being here today and your continued effort and dedication to this space. And I think these were some really great conversations. In the last meeting, we had a really great, robust conversation. And so I think going forward, we'll just organically see how these come together. But I think we have some really great thanks for taking notes, Angela. I think we have some great information and feedback and some things to talk about going forward. So I will promise we'll get the agenda out a little earlier. I've just had a little bit of one of those weeks where all of a sudden I realized I way overscheduled myself, and I forgot to even schedule lunches. I didn't eat lunch most of the week, but just trying to pack it all in. But I just really grateful for all of you. And Angela, thanks for organizing and getting all the logistics done, and have a great weekend and stay safe with the snow. And thank goodness we have some snow coming, and we'll send some your way, Pat.
Thank you. And you did a beautiful job, Jody. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.